What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Days with Wade. Today I wanted to do something a bit different for you guys. I'm going to cover a recent Joe Rogan podcast episode with Wesley Huff. We're going to do a little bit of a summary of the podcast, and we're also going to be reacting to a few of the clips. So if you like the format of these videos, make sure to give me a like and a comment below. There's a few other podcasts that I saw. There's so much going out this week. We've got Mark Zuckerberg, we've got Mel Gibson, we've got Dr. Peterson on Andrew Huberman talking about how to live your life in the best way possible. So if you guys are interested in some podcast summaries for that, let me know down below. Without any further ado, let's get into the video. So the first section is Joe Rogan and Wesley Huff talking about the infamous debate with Billy Carson. Wesley Huff was invited on the debate with just 24 hours to prepare. He wasn't worried though, because he'd seen a lot of Billy Carson's work, and it became quite clear from the get-go that Billy Carson was out of his depth, and Joe Rogan acknowledges that. Wesley studied multiple different ancient languages. He's tried his hand at learning a few of them. He said they're just so complicated, he actually failed. So when someone talks about ancient languages with a certain level of conviction and they don't know what they're talking about, it becomes very apparent very quickly that these people haven't done the work. They're just talking about something that they know nothing about. Wesley said he was trying to get to the methodology that Billy Carson was using to decide whether to trust one source over the other, but Billy was dancing around the subject and not giving an answer, which confirmed Wesley's suspicion that Billy Carson was just self-taught in a lot of these areas. Joe Rogan goes on to highlight the importance of doing the academic research and learning these things rather than just learning it yourself. After the podcast, Billy sent everyone involved, the interviewer, the media manager, and Wesley Huff himself, cease and desist letters. Wesley wasn't concerned about this, however, because he's Canadian and you'd have to jump through a lot of different hoops in order to sue someone. If you're from America, you need to essentially convince the Canadian court that you can win, and it was a massive process. So he wasn't worried about that. He took a photo of that and threw it online and said, there you go, just so you know, he sent this, but I'm just going to ignore it. Wesley actually told Billy Carson that trying to cover this up is going to have a Barbra Streisand effect, which essentially means that the more you try and cover something up, the more viral and known it becomes. Joe Rogan acknowledges that Billy Carson was a great guest on the show. He said, however, Billy Carson is a public figure and he should have just accepted the fact that he was caught with his pants down and he doesn't know the subject matter very clearly, and rather than trying to cover it up and make it all go away. Wesley Huff grew up in a missionary Christian household, moving a lot around Middle East and Pakistan, which gave him a lot of perspectives on various different religions. With his family, they were very much Christian, but we can look into these other religions and see what they're talking about. Him and his parents read the Quran, the Book of Mormon, the Bhagavad Gita. Did I say that right? Bhagavad Gita. Just before Wes's 12th birthday, he was diagnosed with acute transverse myelitis, which is a neurological condition that left him paralyzed from the waist down. With a high percentage of complete paralysis, he managed to make a full recovery within 30 days of his diagnosis. And the doctors quite frankly said that it was a miracle that no atrophy had occurred in his legs for the 30 days. These events helped reinforce his Christian belief. Now they go into the various religious texts and the history. Joe Rogan asked how old are the texts from the Bible. And Wesley Huff said anywhere from the 3rd to the 1st century BC, which I thought was pretty cool. He also said that the Dead Sea Scrolls are around 970 documents, which are distributed out in 11,000 fragments. He said that it takes so much manpower to put these together, let alone translate them. So there's a lot of documents that are fragmented that have never been translated because, quite frankly, he said no one can be bothered doing it, and I don't blame them. They go on to talk about the copper Dead Sea Scroll, which I thought was pretty cool. It's essentially a treasure map, and there's a triangle between Qumran, where the scrolls are written, Jericho and Jerusalem, and there's an article that they pulled up and briefly talked about how there was 65 tons of silver and 26 tons of gold that was discovered from the copper scroll. Wes also noted the Great Isaiah Scroll, which was discovered as part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, was word for word the same as the Hebrew texts found in the Middle Ages, and it was word for word the same, which I thought that detail just blew my mind. Wes talks about how wild the ancient language Sumerian is because it's a language isolate, meaning that there aren't any languages like it out there. Hebrew is an Afro-Semitic language, which is related to Aramaic and the Akkadian language, so there are some similarities there. And Linear Elamite is one that we've only recently been able to understand in 2021. They talk about the resurrection of Jesus, the spread of Christianity, and the inconsistencies with atheists where they can believe the Big Bang and take that on board, but they can't accept any of Jesus' miracles. They talk about how when someone would claim to be the next Messiah, they would manage to accumulate a bit of momentum and a bit of a following, but every single time they would always die off when the Messiah had died. So they just reiterate how amazing Jesus and Christianity is for standing the test of time. They talk about the archaeological exploration of ancient civilizations, how we've only discovered 1% of Egypt. They quickly go over some of the restorations of some of these ancient buildings in Egypt and Iran. Now that the summary is done, let's jump into some of my favorite clips from the show. Joe Rogan makes a pretty good point about people back then believing in all kinds of gods and all these different things. How can you then turn around and say all those things are wrong, but this particular miracle is true? And Wes comes back with a pretty interesting answer. Take a listen.
When we do history, it's an inference to the best explanation. Mm-hmm. And so there are probabilities of things that have happened in history where we can say, okay, there's a higher probability of event A happening and a lower probability of event B happening. Interesting thing about Jesus is that we have more evidence from different writings in the ancient world than we probably should have for someone of his stature. Because we have Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, these 4 biographies. There's really only one other person in and around that time that can claim to have that much kind of independent testimony of their life, and it's the Roman Emperor Tiberius. And so the Roman Emperor, who's the most famous, most powerful person at the time, has a similar amount of historiographical evidence biographically that Jesus does.
Joe Rogan reflects on how crazy it is, how far and wide Christianity proliferated. Check it out.
Kind of crazy that it wound up taking over the area.
Well, that's part of, I think, the argument of, well, how do you explain that? How do you explain it going from 11 scared disciples in an upper room to being willing to go out and die for the proclamation that you believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and you saw him and you touched him and you ate with him, and he wasn't a ghost. You actually ate fish with the resurrected Jesus.
Joe Rogan asks Wes if he's ever debated an atheist before. So in this clip, it's quite obvious that Joe has changed his tune on a lot of different things. So take a listen.
No, not even a formal debate. I think it would be a fascinating conversation because I'm sure, atheists, they vary just like Christians vary, but the worst versions of them are essentially believers in the religion of atheism.
Right.
They worship the concept of there being no God, and this is it. When you die, nothing happens.
Yeah.
And that to me is always so arrogant. Just the fact that you exist at all is so bizarre and so spectacular. The idea that you know for sure that when the lights shut out, that's a wrap, because there's no evidence of the contrary. Well, okay.
Kind of assuming your conclusion there.
Absence of evidence is not evidence. It's especially when you're talking about something that's as bizarre as death.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it for the podcast summary, guys. If you liked the video, make sure to smash that like button and hit subscribe. Let me know what podcast you'd like me to cover next. And with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next one.